Are we live? Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mighty Earth Rapid Response webinar. We're thrilled that there's been so much interest in this platform and program that aligns with our hopes and aspirations for the transformative nature of this platform. I'm joined today by Deborah Lapidus, Mighty Earth's Southeast Asia Campaigns Director, as well as Leo Bottrill, one of our partners on this project, the CEO of MapHubs. And we're going to run through the program of what we're doing, what its purpose is, what we hope to achieve, and I'm going to hand it over to Deborah and Leo for some of the details about how it's operating. I assume most of you know this, but Mighty Earth is a global environmental organization. We run campaigns to protect forests, address climate change, and conserve oceans. We operate all over the world. We've grown a lot over the last few years. And we've had a significant focus on transforming the private sector to reduce deforestation, make agriculture sustainable, and address climate change. We're going to focus a lot on some of that specific private sector transformation today. I wanted to thank, first of all, the funders who've supported this project, especially the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, who got it going in the first place for palm oil, and also NORAD, the Government of Norway Aid Agency, which has provided the resources to expand this project from just palm oil in Southeast Asia to a number of other commodities around the world. Also, I want to thank our partners, Aidenvironment, Waxman Strategies, and MapHubs. So we decided to start this project because Mighty Earth and our partners have played a big role in persuading the world's largest palm oil and other agricultural commodity companies to adopt strong forest and human rights policies over the last several years. That work has really taken off. Since 2013, we've seen more than 90% of globally traded palm oil be covered by strong no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation policies. There are about 20 major traders that have those policies in place. And more recently, through our and other campaigns, we've seen somewhere around half of global soy be covered, at least in principle, by similar policies, essentially the entire chocolate and cocoa industry. And we are about to announce that the tire and natural rubber industry, major players are all also not only have adopted those policies, but are setting up a global platform to police deforestation within their industries. We see potential in other commodities like cattle as well, which is a big driver of deforestation. While we've been thrilled that these policies have been in place, over the last several years we've spent the majority of our energy making sure that they are being implemented. And in palm oil, where the earliest progress on adopting these voluntary private sector policies occurred, we kept seeing palm oil suppliers still engage in deforestation even after the traders had adopted these policies. And suppliers that were engaged in deforestation were somehow still selling palm oil to the major traders. We also found that when we caught this happening, the traders would respond rather quickly. So we would find evidence of a palm oil company engaging in significant tens of thousands, in some cases, acres of deforestation. We would write to the major palm oil traders that had adopted these policies, and they would act quickly. But we were concerned that they were not really policing their supply chains themselves, and that significant deforestation was still going on within their supply chain even as these policies were in place. So one example of that is Corindo, a Korean conglomerate that has significant palm oil operations. They operate in Papua, the Indonesian part of Papua, which is Indonesia's largest intact forest area. They had a very large concession there, and when we looked at the satellite data, we found that they had cleared more than 30,000 hectares of forest by 2016 since their major customers, the traders like Wilmar and Musim Mas and Golden Agri Resources, had adopted these strong no deforestation policies. So this was inconsistent with those policies, that a company that was engaged in such vast deforestation was able to supply them. And you can see on the screen right now the video of exactly what this looked like on the ground and how vast this deforestation was. So we published a report called Burning Paradise about how Corindo's operations were driving deforestation on such a wide scale and how they were continuing to supply some of these major traders. The good news was that as soon as we published that report, within 24 hours, those traders cut off their relationships with Corindo. And that helped put significant pressure on Corindo to stop. We also pressured Corindo's other customers. They have a wind turbine business, and so we pressured them to stop. And that worked. But the problem was we knew that Corindo was not alone, that there were dozens of other suppliers, some almost at the scale of Corindo, like POSCO Daewoo, another Korean company, but many others that were continuing to engage in deforestation. And so we wanted to set up a system that would stop it, that would stop deforestation before it got to the 30,000 hectare or 10,000 hectare or even 1,000 hectare level. And that was the genesis of the Rapid Response Program. And so what we started doing was working with MapHubs and Aidenvironment to both monitor where deforestation was occurring throughout the Southeast Asian palm oil industry, and also who owned the land, and also look at the supply chains to figure out where that palm oil was going, which customers were involved. Then we would take that information and very quickly turn it around to file alerts and grievances with the traders with those policies, so that they, as soon as we saw even 10 or 20 hectares of deforestation occurring on the plantations of a supplier of theirs, we would file an alert and they would have to respond. And it has worked really well. We have found that the traders have been quite responsive to turning that around. And we'll talk about some of the comprehensive results that we found. I think we ultimately hope that the palm oil industry, like these other industries, will take responsibility for monitoring and policing deforestation on their own, that they won't rely exclusively on an NGO like ours. And in fact, over the last year and a half, we've been convening meetings of the palm oil industry to make sure that exactly that happens. That has been making substantial progress, and they've now committed in principle to actually take on that responsibility and start doing more of this. So in some ways, we hope that this rapid response project becomes obsolete because the industry is doing its job. That has not actually been fully implemented yet, and unfortunately the palm oil companies' no deforestation policy implementation still depends a lot on us and others filing grievances like this. So we think there's still a need for it. And we do see this model as applicable in these other industries where there are no deforestation policies, but not necessarily the monitoring and implementation that's required to actually achieve those goals. So with that, I think I will pass it over to Leo Bottrell from MapHubs to explain precisely how the rapid response system is working. Leo?
Thank you. So yes, MapHubs, we're a partner in this project, and we are a Washington, D.C. based technology company who specializes in deforestation monitoring. I'm going to take you basically through a series of steps that we use to turn the sort of raw information that's available to organizations such as Mighty Earth to produce these rapid response reports. So on the screen you'll see there's a map of about 3,500 oil palm concessions available in for Indonesia and for Sarawak. And what we basically do is we use a product called University of Maryland GLAD Alerts, which is a forest alert technology developed by University of Maryland in partnership with Global Forest Watch. And we filter, using these alerts, the amount of deforestation being detected within these 3,500 concessions. And as you can see on this screen, we turn these alerts into a list, which basically is about the 20 or 30 highest deforestation results for all concessions in Indonesia and within Sarawak. And this basically is an illustration of how we organize and filter this information. To filter whether the alert was caused on formal plantation as opposed to forest, we use the Ministry of Forestry 2017 data, which filters whether the alert was actually causing of forest or peatland, or was actually just a formal plantation being cleared. So what we also do is then generate a series of maps. So each concession will have 3 maps. The first map will be a map of the different land class types, so illustrating whether the forest was secondary forest, primary forest, or peatland forest. And then we also produce, using Planet, which is a satellite imagery provider, we use their imagery to basically illustrate the before and after shot from each alert. And to illustrate this, our analysts will then review the Planet imagery and will draw over the alert, quantifying exactly how much deforestation occurred and the type of deforestation was caused. And to give an illustration of what this looks like, this was the #1 concession that we found with the most deforestation. So about 7,500 hectares of deforestation over time. And this GIF just illustrates that transition over the past 2 years. To kind of quantify exactly what this means in reality, this is an infographic illustrating the Petronas Towers, and it's about, the towers are about 200 meters high and about, they're 450 meters high and about 200 meters wide. And if you laid 300 Petronas Towers flat, you would basically fill the area of forest cleared by this one company.
Great.
Deborah?
And this company, just so everybody knows, is called Metro the Starry Jaya. They were our #1 deforester over the period that we've been tracking different cases. So the next step in the rapid response project is taking all this data that Leo's team has analyzed and figuring out what do we do with it to make change on the ground. How do we move this into an action phase? And I think that's where rapid response is really distinct from a lot of other monitoring programs, is that we are looking for the findings, and then we're translating that into real change. So the next step is to assess responsibility for the deforestation and the peatland destruction that we're seeing on the ground, which is unfortunately a little complicated because of how opaque the palm oil industry is. We've been working with a great partner, Aidenvironment, who excels at this kind of ownership research and supply chain analysis. And they look at things like mill lists and notary deeds and trade data and other sources to ascertain which companies are connected in the supply chain to what we're seeing on the ground. So for each incident that we assess, we look at which are the big traders and the big brand name companies that are connected. And then we publish that in reports. And so every month we have been publishing a report with 10 cases and sending that to all the major traders of global palm oil. That has the charts of responsibility and who they're connected to. And then we file grievances with each of the major traders that are connected to the deforestation on the ground. Fortunately, many of the traders with no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation policies have now launched public grievance mechanisms where anybody can file a case saying that their policy has been violated, and the company is required to publish that on their grievance list and act on it. And so with each of the reports that we send to the traders, we allow about 3 weeks for a reply. Often, as Glenn said, we get replies much more quickly. And then we monitor their grievance logs to see what the status is of the grievances that we filed. And then we assess trader performance on responding to grievances based on whether the cases have been resolved or not resolved. So to define that further, by resolved, we're looking for a deforestation moratorium. We're looking for suppliers to have enacted a no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation policy that complies with the requirements of their customers. Or in the case of persistent noncompliance, the supplier would need to be suspended from the supply chain. For cases that we consider to be unresolved, either the company has not filed the grievance, or they're in a process of engaging with the non-compliant supplier, but the deforestation continues and there's no real outcome. So that was our way of being able to compare apples to apples from trader to trader, how each trader is ranking in terms of responding to grievances. And here you can see a chart where we analyze how traders compare to one another in terms of how many grievances, what percentage of grievances they've resolved. So top of the list is right now is Louis Dreyfus, Golden Agri-Resources, and Musi Mas. Toward the bottom, you will see Cargill, ADM, and Pacific Interlink, HSA Group. The reason that Cargill and ADM feature at the bottom is because they really have been poor at updating their grievance trackers. And so there's not a lot of information out in the public domain. It's been 5 months since we've seen Cargill, for example, update its grievance tracker. They've agreed that they will now start doing a better job at that public reporting, but that's really the only way for the public to know if non-compliances are being addressed. So we have seen a number of cases resolved through this type of direct engagement behind the scenes, and I'll go through some of our successes in a minute. But unfortunately, there's many cases where further action is needed, and we need to escalate beyond just direct engagement. So the next step is to really file alerts and do public communications, contacting customers and investors of the problematic companies. And here you see an example of such an alert with the Korean palm oil company that Glenn mentioned before, POSCO Daewoo. We've been campaigning on them for a number of years. They have destroyed over 27,000 hectares of pristine rainforest in Papua, and we've been regularly monitoring their deforestation. Through our campaign work, we actually have achieved a moratorium on any further clearance, but there's still a lot of work to do. So here you see an alert that we sent to the Dutch Pension Fund, which had investments in POSCO Daewoo, ABP. And following that alert, we engaged with the Dutch Pension Fund for many months. We did a whole blitz of media work in the Netherlands, and I'm happy to report that resulted in divestment from POSCO Daewoo by the Dutch Pension Fund last June. However, they did not divest from the parent company, which is the steel conglomerate POSCO. So we're continuing to follow up and urge other investors to act to divest from POSCO, given the egregious deforestation that's happening there. But that's an example of how we engage with investors and consumer brands. And then if that still is not enough to compel further action, we will escalate to a public campaign, which entails further outreach to customers and more financiers, media exposés, and really analyzing the different business arms of the companies that we're taking on and figuring out how to leverage them to change. So now I want to move into some of our findings from our last year and 4 months of the pilot project with the palm oil industry. We have found over 56 concessions where deforestation has occurred. We found more than 50 companies responsible for this deforestation and peatland destruction. We're seeing a lot of significant new clearance from rogue actors that unfortunately are no longer, well, fortunately, they're no longer linked to the major supply chains of the palm oil companies that we're engaging with. But now they are selling to what we call the leakage market. So this is markets in Asia and the Middle East and places where there's lower demand for responsibly grown commodities, and they're just harder markets to address. So if you look at our top 10 deforesters that we found from the pilot project so far, all of them now are part of this leakage market and will need to be addressed through campaign work. Oh, and then one other trend we're seeing is that a number of the tycoon-owned logging companies that have for decades now been well documented to be engaging in deforestation and human rights abuse, like Rimanan Hijau and Sam Ling and Shenyang and Ta'an and KTS, they unfortunately are now all engaged significantly in palm oil. And despite many of the major traders having group-wide no deforestation commitments that should apply, it should mean that they're not buying from any supplier engaged in deforestation for any commodity, because those companies were primarily seen as timber companies. The palm oil traders have not suspended them or taken action on them. And so we're finding now that these companies are growing palm oil and they're logged out logging concessions, and they're still linked to most of the major traders. So in terms of our successes, we have already seen more than 50 instances of companies being suspended from the major supply chains of the traders that we're engaging with. We've achieved 5 supplier moratoriums, and also a significant improvement in grievance tracking. Before, several of the companies had public grievance trackers, but several did not. And now we see universal grievance tracking as well as much more regular updates to those grievance trackers. So anybody can go look and see where the cases of noncompliance are for each of the major palm oil traders. and what the status is. So here you can see an example of AAK's grievance tracker, and we've highlighted the filings that relate to our recent rapid response reports. So I wanted to give a few examples of different kinds of incidents that we're seeing, as well as different outcomes. So this first example is an outcome that led to a deforestation moratorium. The company this actually came from our first rapid response report. The company is Anglo-Eastern Plantations. They are a British company registered on the London Stock Exchange. We found that they were clearing 400 hectares of forest in the year prior to our rapid response project, most of which overlapped with Borneo orangutan habitat. Prior to that, they cleared 3,500 hectares, 700 of which was on Borneo orangutan habitat. And there's significant forest left in the concession, close to 10,000 hectares. So there was a lot at stake. We contacted all the major traders, and because of the grievances that we filed with companies like Wilmar and Golden Agri Resources and Cargill, and Asher Agrolistari, all of whom either suspended the company or engaged with them to achieve a moratorium, we were able to halt this clearance. So the company adopted a moratorium in early 2018, and then proceeded to do a high carbon stock assessment with a licensed assessor. That assessment was completed last October. The Golden Agri Resources reports in their grievance filing that now the company is starting to work on a new sustainability policy. The one caveat is that we did just see, through our ongoing monitoring, some new land development at the concession. So we've already asked Golden Agri Resources and Wilmar what is happening at that concession to get to the bottom of what's going on, because even though the high carbon stock assessment has been completed, the company should have waited for peer review before further continuing any land development. So that's just to say that even when commitments are made, it's important that we continue to monitor as we do and remain vigilant and really hold companies accountable to their commitments. So the next example is a case in which the company has already been suspended by all the major traders who acted quickly to clean up their supply chains. But unfortunately now that company is servicing the leakage market. So here is BLD, which is connected to the KTS logging company. They are also affiliated with the Corona palm oil refinery. Their chain reaction research says they're the 6th largest leakage market refiner in Southeast Asia. Glenn and I have actually been working on BLD for some time now. In 2015, we exposed ongoing clearance of deep peatlands, as well as encroachment onto native customary rights lands at their 20,000 hectare concession in Sarawak, Malaysia. That resulted in early action by Bunge and Wilmar, who had been very large buyers from Corona, suspending BLD and Corona from their supply chains back in 2015. Unfortunately, the clearance of peatlands did not stop. And in our rapid response reports, we found 4,000 hectares of new clearance of deep peatlands, which put BLD in the number 2 spot of top deforesters, or top peatland clearance entities in the last year and a half. And so we are now looking at campaign avenues to influence BLD. We've visited their site in Sarawak. We're talking to local allies on the ground, and are gathering information potentially toward filing a Forest Stewardship Council complaint, because their parent company, KTS, is actually certified through the Forest Stewardship Council and is very likely violating the commitments that they've made to that body. We've had other efforts to file FSC complaints with Corindo and other companies. And I just want to point out here, you can see how our alerts, how the satellite imagery looks in our alerts. So the box that is on the left is when the concession was still forested within that box, and on the right is the new clearance. And that's just a small area of the destruction that we found. That represents 1,200 hectares of peatland destruction. So the third case that I wanted to profile is a very recent case from our last report, and it's still connected to the major supply chains of the companies. It is a case that was alerted to us by the Bruno Manzer funds. So this is an example of an outside alert that we've incorporated into our system, and it prompted us to do our own analysis. And it is abutting the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Sarawak, Malaysia. It's also next to a national park. The company has over 4,000 hectare concession that they're actively clearing right now. In fact, in the last 3 weeks of our monitoring, they already cleared 100 hectares. So it's very urgent. And this is a video that is a clip of a video from Bruno Manzer Funds. So here you can see all of the major companies that are still connected to this deforester. They're called Double Dynasty Group. And we are waiting responses from the companies to see how they're going to respond to this case. So stay tuned. And the last thing I want to cover is just our website. So we've put a lot of great resources on our website. It's www.mightyearth.org/rapid-response. You can see an overview of the system, our trader rankings. If you click on the logos for each trader, it'll take you to a spreadsheet where you can see all the grievances that are linked to that trader and the status of those grievances. Very useful is also links to each of the traders' grievance logs. And here you can download all of our reports that we've filed so far. You can also see case studies of both successful outcomes and those where there's still ongoing deforestation. So I encourage everybody to take a look at our website.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. And I think one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is, there's still significant problems in the palm oil industry, but it's also worth saying that we have seen dramatic progress over the last several years. When we started this work, there were more than 400 supplier companies engaged in active deforestation. We believe that number is now down to fewer than 20, and that really is remarkable progress. There's still significant problems, and as Deborah said, even where companies have said they will do the right thing, committed to do HCS assessments, you still need to remain vigilant to make sure that they are actually adhering to those, and also just following the correct procedures, even if they're not doing deforestation. Sometimes they're straying on other aspects that are also important. This rapid response project, as well as the adoption of the policies and other efforts and the campaigns, have led to significant progress. I'd also say, we do see the campaigns and some of those rogue traders as the current really major priority to continue making progress to achieve zero deforestation in the palm oil industry. We've got to find levers to move those remaining rogue companies that are clearing in Papua or Heart of Borneo or elsewhere. I think the extraordinary thing is that we have found that is possible. Corindo, Pasco Daewoo, several other companies that we've tackled, people thought that those were unmovable, that they were, the idea is, oh, you're an Asian company selling to an Asian market, there's absolutely nothing you can do. What we have found is that there's other levers through investors, through anger in those home countries. I mean, in Korea, in part working with our ally, Korean Friends of Environmental Movements, there's been huge outrage within Korea that Korean companies would drive this kind of deforestation. It's been a top-level media story. We've also worked with, in that case, Siemens, the big, among other things, wind power purchaser, to put pressure on Corindo that way. In company after company, we have found levers other than just the palm oil supply chain to move these rogue actors. Our rapid response project is intended to cleaning up the mainstream palm oil supply chains. That's a necessary but not sufficient step to eradicating deforestation and human rights exploitation throughout the palm oil industry. But we also need to accelerate these campaigns on these remaining rogue actors. I think I'd also just like to emphasize, on the progress front, the cases that Deborah highlighted as being remaining bad ones are quite significant, some of them. It was 4,000 hectares of deforestation, 7,000 hectares of deforestation. Having said that, that's a lot less than 30,000 hectares of deforestation, which we were seeing just a few years ago. And so we are hopeful that with continued action by the palm oil industry, accelerated action by the palm oil industry, as well as continued vigilance through the Rapid Response Project, that we can continue driving down deforestation. We hope to achieve this kind of progress in these other industries, notably cocoa, rubber, soy, cattle, and paper. Again, in all of these industries, many companies, and in some cases almost all the major companies, have strong no deforestation policies. But we're seeing a consistent pattern that they are not necessarily implementing them. They're where the palm oil industry was in maybe 2016. I think in some cases the industries and the particular companies feel like, oh, we have good policies on paper, what more do you want? And the reality is that it only matters if they actually implement, and really if they only automatically cut off suppliers who engage in deforestation and breach their policies. So that is where our focus is now. Over the next year, we're going to start filing these alerts with the major soy, paper, rubber, cocoa, and cattle companies who have no deforestation policies, at the same time that our broader campaigns are pushing more companies to adopt and implement these policies, as well as ideally create industry-wide platforms to police deforestation and human rights abuse throughout these industries. So with that, we invite any questions, and you can tweet us at StanMighty. You can also send an email to info@mightyearth.org, and happy to take any. We're just pulling up the questions right now. There's been a lot of partners who have contributed to making this a success, and so we're really appreciative. Okay, we've got a lot of questions, it looks like. The first one, which I'll pose to Deborah, is why isn't the industry policing itself?
That's a great question. So in many cases, the industry has their own monitoring systems in place. In fact, if you look at their grievance trackers, you'll often see with the grievances that we filed, text saying, oh, we were already monitoring that company and engaging them. Unfortunately, what we are not seeing enough of is action following that awareness. So there might be some conversations happening with a problematic supplier, but they're not acting to stop the deforestation as quickly as they do when we file those grievances. And so we see that as a problem, and we're convening many of the major palm oil traders together to talk about how they can have faster action on non-compliant suppliers and to look for results within 48 hours rather than 48 months. But yeah, it's not sustainable for a small NGO to be policing the entire palm oil industry. These are multi-billion-dollar companies who have the resources to be doing the monitoring and doing the assessments themselves. And there's some of that happening, but we would like to see it more comprehensive and more effective.
And I think it's worth saying one of the reasons that we launched the Rapid Response Project in the first place was that companies told us quietly that they would respond and exclude companies from their supply chains if we filed grievances, but that they needed the political cover from us doing that in order to actually enforce their policies. That still is the case, unfortunately, in many cases, that they feel like it's politically difficult for them to enforce their policies without the cover of an activist environmental group highlighting the case. It literally is just us, sending an email with the specific information about the case that is sufficient cover for them. Sometimes we have escalated it to a big public global campaign, but just that grievance is enough to act. We hope that they can go beyond that and really take the initiative as well. Okay, I think second question was, wouldn't it make more sense for a large multinational industry to do this work instead of a small nonprofit team? The answer is yes, and we are pushing these industries to do that. We're excited about the progress, for instance, that the tire and natural rubber industry are making, where you have more than 8 companies, 8 of the world's largest tire companies, through our rubber project have now announced strong no deforestation policies. We are working to make sure that they are policing that as an industry. Stay tuned for big news on that in the next couple of weeks. Timeline for expansion is another question. So we are hoping within months to start filing alerts with some of the big companies in the soy industry, and by the end of the year to be doing the same thing in the other industries I mentioned, including cocoa, cattle, and rubber. And we are already doing some in paper and timber that is connected to palm oil, and so we'll be continuing to do that in hopefully a little more comprehensive way. And I should say, this is, of course, when you're looking at these other industries, you're looking at a lot of other geographies like the Mekong, like Africa, like South America. And in some cases, there's been so much attention on palm oil in Malaysia and Indonesia that there's a lot of data sources there. on land ownership and supply chains. So we need to build that out for these other industries. As we've already started the research process with our partners, and we are finding a lot. And so we're pretty confident that we will be able to police these supply chains effectively in these other areas. Again, we don't want to be the only ones doing it. We'd prefer that rapid response is sort of an external verification rather than the main driver of implementation of no deforestation policies, and that's why we're also in a parallel track pushing industries to take action. The second question is, explain the division of labor between technology and rapid response personnel. So I'd say, we are working as a big team with the Mighty Earth side, and then MapHubs doing a lot of the technical implementation work, as well as Aidenvironment on land ownership and supply chain research. But Leo, do you want to talk a little bit more about how that works from your end, and then we can talk on the Mighty Earth side?
Sure. So we use a combination of different technology tools. First of all, we use a platform which is called MapHubs, which we use to manage a lot of the spatial information that we collect, like the concession data. And then we have access to the GLAD alerts from the University of Maryland and Global Forest Watch, which we are able to, using cloud computing, calculate the amount of alerts inside each concession. And then these maps are all stored on MapHubs, and then we can transfer the maps to our partners at Aidenvironment, who can verify the information and actually make more detailed manual mapping using GIS software of the amount of clearance in each concession. So it's really like a sort of a supply chain of taking raw materials and then processing it, organizing it, and making it into like a finished product.
Great. And Deborah, do you want to talk about what we do when we take those alerts and on our end?
Yeah, so then we compile those alerts into the reports, as I showed in my presentation. We send those via email to the major traders. We ask them to file it as public grievances in their public grievance logs. I should mention my colleague Phil Aikman has been heavily involved in this project and that engagement with the major palm oil traders. And then we follow their logs and the emails and look to see what action has been taken in the following 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, and there's a lot of behind-the-scenes engagement, follow-up conversations that happens there. And then, in some cases, with some of those traders who have, for instance, not updated their grievance tracker for 6 months, we have, may have interactions with the CEO of the company or other senior executives to drive change throughout. And then we also will follow up with consumer companies as necessary, and as well as institutional investors. We've mostly been focused on engagement with the traders so far because we have found them to be quite responsive. But as we spread this to other commodities like soy, where while on paper, much of the soy trade is covered by no deforestation, no exploitation policies. Implementation has been lacking. We anticipate that we'll be working much more with the consumer companies to pressure those traders to act on instances of deforestation within their supply chains. And
so then on that note, sometimes we need to bring in our communications team to help amplify cases that are not being resolved.
Great. And then next question is, what would you like to see companies do to help improve rapid response?
Personally, I think more transparency is super helpful. So the mill lists, in particular, the disclosures that companies have been doing to say what mills they're sourcing from, have really enabled us to quickly attribute responsibility for the deforestation and peatland clearance we're seeing on the ground. And that's good for the companies too, because then we can engage with them right away when we're finding a violation. They see that as helping their monitoring. We've heard that feedback from a number of companies, and they can address the problem before it becomes a public relations issue, and before they're criticized in the media. And so I encourage more and more consumer brands and other companies to be following the best practice of revealing the traceability information in the mill lists that you're sourcing from, as well as which plantations.
And I would say one big issue is we and others are looking to drive companies, including supplier companies, to make their concession maps available publicly and post them on public platforms. So that's one of the things that's a priority. I mean, I think what's interesting is we are able to find land ownership data, working with Aidenvironment and others. So it is findable. It requires a lot of effort. It would be a lot easier if those companies just made all of their concession maps through their whole supply chains transparent. We've seen a transparency revolution in the palm oil industry in particular, where many consumer companies and most of the major traders now post their supplier mill lists and locations online. We shouldn't underestimate what a significant revolution that is. These traders have traditionally thrived on opacity, and now they're driving a quite extraordinary level of transparency in the industries. What's interesting for us is we have not seen anything close to that level of transparency in the other industries we're looking at, like cocoa, rubber, and soy. And we believe that transparency is indispensable to progress. Consumers want to know where their food comes from and that it's produced in a manner consistent with their values. That message has gotten through the palm oil industry. We don't understand why it's not applicable in some of these other industries as well. So that's going to be a big push. One question is, are you doing any work in Brazil with soy or cattle, or planning to? The answer to that is yes. We are. So we've done a series of investigations on soy, which is going into global meat supply chains. Those are all available at mightyearth.org, and have found vast deforestation, mostly connected to Bunge and Cargill. And we've been continuing to work hard on that and calling for action by the industries. We have seen no deforestation policies from Louis Dreyfus, from Wilmar, and significant progress from COFCO, the Chinese state-owned trader. And we are starting to actually very soon we'll be filing alerts through the Rapid Response Project on that. We found through our investigations, dozens of instances of deforestation for soy. On cattle, we are also hoping this year to file alerts with some of the Brazilian cattle companies that have no deforestation policies, but in some cases are still exposed to deforestation risk. And we hope with sufficient resources over time to do a broader push to transform the cattle industry more broadly, not just through rapid response. And we've one question coming in right now. What's the biggest victory that we've had, presumably through rapid response?
It's hard to piece apart the work on rapid response and then the campaign work because it's kind of a fluid process. It's a spectrum. I think in the last few years, our biggest achievement overall in our palm oil work has been getting Corindo and Pasco Daewoo to announce moratoriums on their deforestation. As Glenn showed, Corindo was clearing very rapidly. They cleared 30,000 hectares of pristine rainforest in Papua over just 2 years. There's over 80,000 hectares left in their concessions, and they would have been poised to already have destroyed most of those. So personally, I feel that that's been our greatest kind of on the ground achievement, and then also the deterrent effect that that's had in persuading other companies that they shouldn't be going to Papua because they'll be left with stranded assets. Because now Corindo and Pasco Daewoo both have moratoriums in place and are not able to continue clearing the rest of their concessions. And so we hope other companies get that signal that Papua should be one of the last places on the earth that still has large tracts of remaining forests. I presented the Anglo-Eastern case in a rapid response project, which very quickly, that company was clearing, close to 4,000 hectares of forest over the last 2 years prior to rapid response. There's still 10,000 hectares left. And in that case, we saw very quick action across the board. They were connected to almost all the major palm oil traders to either suspend the company or engage with them to achieve the moratorium that they enacted. So I think that's one of our greatest rapid response successes, and you can see more on our website where we profile different success stories.
Great. I think there's been a substantial deterrent effect that we've seen. I mean, I think we're really proud of, we know that there's 80,000 hectares in Papua, actually more than that if you look at the different companies that's still standing, at least in part because of this work. But we are pretty confident due to our discussions with CEOs across the palm oil industry that this project is having a deterrent effect on development of new plantations. People know that through rapid response and others who are monitoring it, that they'll be caught. So one question is, what's the difference between rapid response and Global Forest Watch?
Well, Global Forest Watch, as I mentioned, is one of the sources of a critical ingredient within the rapid response system, which is the GLAD alerts, which they developed in conjunction with the University of Maryland GLAD lab. So as a data source, that's a hugely valuable contribution. I think the distinction technologically is we have to handle a lot of data which is not available on Global Forest Watch, which is concession data, and also imagery information which is not available as well. And we have to produce some of this information through a private process as well, whilst we're processing and reviewing the information to ensure it's accurate, so, which is why we have our own infrastructure, a mapping infrastructure to handle this type of process. So it really is a need for a more bespoke, customized tool to then Global Forest Watch is able to provide as a technology, but as a data source, it's incredibly valuable to the project.
And ultimately, we're now awash in data about where deforestation is happening through Global Forest Watch and other resources. The challenge we've seen is that just because the data exists does not mean it's acted upon. I can't emphasize that enough. That has been our fundamental observation over the last several years, that all the data that these companies need to act on deforestation within their supply chains exists. Even, you hear a lot of complaints about how it's difficult to find land ownership to see who's really responsible. I would say that with our limited resources, we are able to find that information. It sometimes takes work. It sometimes takes going to a notary office out in the middle of Indonesia to get that information. But you can do it, and we do it. And Aidenvironment has been a major driver of that. And so, more broadly, we've seen the Consumer Goods Forum and other companies that signed the New York Declaration on Forests in 2014 commit to end deforestation through commercial supply chains by 2020. And I think clearly you need to have information about who's responsible for deforestation to police it within the private sector. We believe that in all the sub-commodities, except probably cattle, where there's a lot more work that needs to be done, it is entirely possible to achieve that goal of effectively zero deforestation by 2020, by the end of 2020. It requires a commitment to actually, spend the money that's necessary, which we do. It's not that much to go out and find concession data, to go out and map your own, your own supply chains. I think companies sometimes are daunted by that. There's a lot of service providers that can help them. We're trying to make as much of that information as transparent as possible. We'd love more help to make this bigger and more comprehensive and be able to go after more of those rogue actors. But this is all doable, and it's doable for investors, for consumer companies, for traders. It just requires the commitment, the will to do it, and ultimately the will to enforce. One observation that we've had working across these industries is that you need to have automatic processes, and you need to have rules. So where there's a no deforestation policy, it unfortunately doesn't really work to just talk to the company, to engage, as it's called, over time. If you start cutting off companies that violate the policies, everybody gets that message, and it just becomes an automatic expectation that compliance is necessary to access global markets. And there may be a lot of whining about it, but people do comply when those are the rules of the road. And that also can provide a spur for government to do its job in enforcing the law, policing deforestation, because companies that have no deforestation policies don't want to be undermined by rogue actors. And in some cases, we have seen companies do more to lobby governments. We're trying to encourage that in many parts of the world, to work with companies to go to government together and lobby them to do their part. But this making it automatic is the thing that we have found to be totally decisive in terms of whether private sector action works or not. That engagement is, at this point, when so many companies are familiar with the no deforestation policies, it really is about whether you're going to back up your policies with action or not. That is the critical and most decisive factor, and that is what we are trying to use rapid response to do. We provide the political heft and some of the research and precision to get companies to act on this data. And we hope to be able to do that with government as well in the future. Big question, any work related to the financial sector in deforestation, like pension funds' role in deforestation?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one recent example is our work engaging with the Dutch pension fund, ABP, on the Pasco Daewoo case, again, a Korean agribusiness operating in Papua with over close to 30,000 hectares of deforestation. We had found that the Dutch pension fund was invested in Pasco Daewoo and sent alerts to them about the satellite mapping we were seeing, and then engaged with them over many months. We did significant media work in the Netherlands, connecting journalists with people on the ground who opposed Pasco de Woo's development. There was actually a 16-minute national TV story about the case, and it led to ABP divesting from Pasco de Woo just last June. We are encouraging the next step of both ABP and other investors to divest from Pasco, the giant steel conglomerate, which owns Pasco de Woo, because Pasco de Woo is still not taking enough action to address their long legacy of deforestation and human rights abuse. In addition, we've done significant work with the Norwegian Pension Fund, and really want to tip my hat to Rainforest Foundation Norway and all the great work they've been doing to see through the Norwegian Pension Fund being one of the top leaders in the world in terms of very early action on addressing deforestation and divesting from a number of rogue palm oil companies.
And a couple other institutions that have been really leaders, Green Century Capital Management, which has been a leader in driving strategic engagement by institutional investors, as well as New York State pension funds. And we've seen interest from UNPRI in taking a more robust role in driving change. And I think that all together they represent some quite substantial investments. And we've been engaging them across the board, and we see that they as well can be and probably should be more of a driver of action. So last question. How much on the ground work goes into rapid response? We try to do as much of this as possible through remote sensing because it's more efficient and cost effective. So we, as Leo mentioned, we're taking a lot of different sources of remote sensing data, Global Forest Watch, Planet, and others, and distilling it because we can move quickly on it. We also are open to on-the-ground information like we got from Bruno Manser Funds. We also work with a lot of local communities all over Indonesia and Malaysia who feed us data, and we can follow up and verify that and then put it into a format that's actionable by companies. I think one of the things we found is that many of these communities and even local civil society organizations don't feel like they have the access or the leverage with the big companies to get them to act. And so, fortunately, we do because of the campaigns and international presence. And so one of the things I think we're very proud of is being able to provide a conduit for those communities and civil society groups to come in and act. So I think with that, we've reached 11:30. Thank you for your attention. Please go to our website, mightyearth.org. Sign up for our newsletter. We send out regular updates about these and other issues, not only private sector action, but also government action and some of the big trends we're seeing. You can email us at rapidresponse@mightyearth.org for specific questions or follow-up or ask to be added to the alerts. mightyearth.org/rapidresponse is the specific website for this. And thank you to Leo and Deborah and Phil and Aidenvironment and Waxman Strategies and our donors and everybody who's contributed to making this a big success. Thanks so much.
Thank you.